Like I said, we're going to be making a utensil spoon tonight example. I'm going to show you how to use, with more actual specifics, how to use the form tool space in Fusion 360. So let's hop over to Fusion and go from there. All right, so standard, blah, 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 blah. Ideally, if you want to open up a form, this does not have to follow a preset model. However, if you would like, you can absolutely work from a model. So I'm going to do that for myself. Bring in a canvas from computer, spoon, plop it down right in the center. Super freaking good. Now, obviously, I want to make sure this is kind of sort of the right size or close enough the right size. So I'm going to go to the top view, open up my canvas, right click on spoon on the canvas and calibrate. So pick a point, point to point, end to end. Right now, that is a 15 millimeter spoon, rather teeny. So larger, 150, which would be a 15 centimeter spoon. I should have double checked a ruler because I always brain fart on how big stuff actually is, but sure, we'll go with that. Again, doesn't have to be exact, doesn't have to be an exact reference, but I'm going to use a actual reference to at least get my general sizing right and the general dimensions. All right, that'll work. So calibrated, resize the shape to an actual functional size. That works. You can always double check this later, scale things to fit, that sort. All right, so we're going to start with entering the form workspace, which is clicking the pink squishy thing with a explosion going on. Now, so far, we kind of played around with just experimenting with some of the preset shapes like box, cylinder, and then the quad ball and sphere. We haven't worked yet with plane and face, which a face is a single face, or that you can, of course, create multiples. A plane is a single planar axis thing, across like an XY or XZ, that sort of thing, with multiple faces and vertices. Doesn't really matter, but we're going to create a spoon, reshaping two different shapes and then joining them together. So I'm actually going to use a sphere to create the bowl and a plane to create the handle and join them together using the bridge tool. Now, could you do this completely with only the sphere, starting with the sphere, or only a plane? Absolutely. But I wanted to show you how to also actually join a couple of objects together and work with it that way. So first, I'm going to start with a sphere to create the bowl. Just seems more natural to me. Now, there's two ball options. You have the quad ball and you have the sphere. The sphere is broken up into, as far as its edges and faces, and like a globe, longitudinal and latitudinal axes. Essentially, it just means that it has two main vertice points at the top, or what we'll call the top and the bottom, or at very least on two sides of a sphere. Yeah, sure. And you have your edges that radiate outward from there and meet back again. The quad ball is more like a cube that has been inflated into a sphere, if that works for you to wrap your head around, in that it has general faces that are kind of broken up into kind of quadrants. Hence quad ball. Yeah. When you say it that way, it almost makes sense. Anyhow, foolery aside, let's start with the sphere. Now I'm going to start with, you still have to select a starting plane. So since I'm working off of the XY plane, I'm going to start the XY there, and I'm going to put the sphere, actually, let me snap back to the top, and I put the sphere roughly in the center of the spoon. And I mean, I'm going to put it on one of the major axes, but I'm going to size it as roughly the size of the spoon scoop and go from there. So I'm going to start right there. And remember, don't hit enter, but a couple of things. I want to scale this up to, sure, roughly there. That kind of sort of fits. I'm going to manipulate this, no problem. But you have a few things. You can, of course, add it by size, so actual diameter numerically. If you want, that works. If not, fine. Now, we are going to be manipulating these faces and such. I highly recommend do not make it complex. Keep it simple for now. You can always add complexity later. This slider here allows you to add more faces, or on the toolbox, it has longitudinal and latitudinal faces. If you scale up or down, you can see it adds a lot more one way, dials it way back the other. If you do too few, you see how it kind of flattens out those sides. So 8 is plenty. I would keep it with at least an even number in this case. And 8, convenient thing about that is it also has what will be a mirror line that lines up right on the y-axis here. So with that in mind, and of course you can always add and subtract more at the bottom, but I'm going to leave that as is. So the default setting is 8 and 8, works for me. Now the last option before you hit OK on your toolbox is symmetry. Now you can add this now, or you can always add it later. But since we're here now, might as well. So you have a few options. You have none, which is the default setting. You have mirror and you have circular. Mirror means it's going to be across two major, or it'll be on either sides of a major, what will be an axis line, an axis edge, or it can be circular. So what that means is mirror, you can select either length symmetry, don't want that. Width symmetry, that's actually the one I do want to use, but just to show you. And then height symmetry, you can't really see it right now, but as I orbit down, you can see that it means it will be symmetrical on top as it is on the bottom. I actually do want it by width, but you can also check multiples. You could actually break this up as is into more symmetry. The circular symmetry allows you to select by multiples, radiating from a center point. So like there. So it's pretty neat. You can play with this, and I'm actually going to experiment with this later. But for now, let's again keep it simple. Mirror across the width, right up the y-axis. Perfect. Works for me. Let's thinkify. There we go. Now, one thing I immediately forgot, save your work. All right. Example. Thank you, Tick. Anyway. All right. So first off, I have a weird sphere floating in space, kind of nested into a spoon shape. Neat. So we are going to be using the edit form, but you don't have to enter that space just yet, because what I want to do first, I want to chop this in half. I want to delete half of it. Right now, it's kind of as a solid, meaning it's going to react as a solid as we've been working in space, or in the solid workspace so far this semester. I'm going to use a from the right selection box, so I don't have to get too much, but I want everything above the top. But what that means is if I had used a from the left selection box and I select the same amount, it skips all of these faces and these vertical edges. I want to include everything above that center line, but I don't want to include that center line. So it works better with a selection box from the right, which will select all the things that box touches. Cool, there we go. Hit delete. Boop. Now you see immediately from the inside, or from the sides here, it kind of flattened these edges. When I orbit up, now you can see I have a surface level thickness hemisphere. Surface meaning it is essentially just the thickness of nothing. It is just represented simply as its surface. Cool. Now is where I can start playing. So which way do you want to go first? Do you want to work from the side and kind of squish it into a somewhat bowl shape? Or do you work from the top and try to get that shaped in that semi point? Might as well do it that way. There's less motion going in that. Okay. So I'm going to switch to edit form workspace. So from here, as we talked about before, you can select however you wish to work. You can isolate by selection filters, selecting only by vertices, which is just the little points, only by edges, which is the existing edge, or only by faces, which are the spaces between both vertices and edges. Doesn't really matter. You can leave it as default all, which allows you to select whatever you actually intend to select. If you're free sculpting, I prefer to work that way. Now, first things first, we've got to stretch this out. So I often like to work by just vertices. So for myself, I'm going to select by vertices. Now, if I just select the top one and stretch that out, you can see what's going to happen there. That works nicely, but that does some weird stuff there. So instead, let's snap back, work from the top, and I want to make sure to grab all of those vertices. So I'm going to use a from the left selection box, so only what it's completely enclosing. Select there. Now I can drag this all forward. Now, the issue with it doing it this way also is I'm still going to warp things in a really strange manner. That doesn't work poorly. That actually works okay. But I do want to show you one other thing you can do before you really start shaping. And that is working with the soft modification options. Now, if you look down the rest of the toolbox, obviously you have, as always, you have numeric inputs, and that's a lot. Let's not bother with that. Selection options, same. There's a lot going on. What I want to work with is the second one down, soft modification. Now, you do actually have to activate it. Check the checkbox. Now, what this essentially does is it blends your movements, so it's not so harsh. I was selecting by vertices. As I drug those vertices, they all stayed locked in place and everything warped around them. Because remember, as Fusion works with its surface tools, it's a T-spline manipulation, which works very much like pushing and pulling like a sheet of fabric. You pull one thing at one single point, it's going to sharply warp in different ways. So a way to exactly that, soften this, is activating the soft modification box. Let me move to the other side so I can see a little more clearly. Really doesn't matter. So you have a few options here. You have this first part is extent by distance, face count, or rectangular face count. Honestly, just leave it as distance. It gets very confusing. All that is showing you the impact range. And I'll explain this in a moment. You have your transition types, skipping down the impact distance that you can manipulate. You have smooth, linear, or bulge. That'll make sense in a moment too. And then the weight. The weight is just the effectiveness of the effect. I know that. What does that actually mean? Kind of jargony. It means how much effect will it have in that area. All right, let's actually figure out what the heck any of this stuff means. Let me orbit down so you can see things a little more clearly. All right, let's start with extent. The extent is the range. I have selected all of these vertices, but let's try to minimize that. Let me just select that one. I selected this vertex just haphazardly. This doesn't mean anything at the moment. But I want you to note two things. Normally, all the edges, all the vertices are black. If I select one, all of a sudden now you see that there's a range of going from red, diffusing out to white before it goes back to black. That is representing, on one, the effect range is the extent. How far does this go out? Right now, it's just defaulting at 23.94 millimeters. Doesn't really matter why. You can put this at 10 millimeters. Now you see the range shrank quite a lot. Now it's only just this kind of general quadrant here. The red is much smaller. The white is much smaller. So it's demonstrating just how far that extent is. Actually, I'm going to leave it more of where it was. It was like 25. I know it wasn't actually exactly, but whatever. You can augment this as you like. You can play with this as you like. The other things are the extension or the transition. So let's show you what I exactly mean by this. Let me drag one of these out. See how it's warping from just that spot. And it's kind of, well, bulging. Right now, the transition is rather smooth. I can change that to linear. Linear means it's going to going to try to keep everything rather sharp. So as I drag out, it doesn't really seem like it's making that much of a difference, but that's because it's already had an effect. Let me drag back. But a bulge, and you can now see that it doesn't hold on to that more of sharp point, or at least kind of sort of point anymore. Now the effect range is much larger. You see that everything is red. So what that's doing is the bulge means that it wants the whole thing to move. Think of it in terms of the difference of if I want it to smooth transition. Think of this more in terms of if you have a sheet, like a fabric sheet, you pull one point, it's going to pull that one point and everything else is going to kind of follow with it. Right now, because the weight is set at 0, It's going to do it in a kind of an even manner. But if I switch over to bulge, think of it in terms of now there's kind of like a ball behind that point. Now you have much more coming out at the same time, if that helps. It might just confuse you further. But the idea is you're just changing the effectiveness of that area. The last thing is weight. You dial it down or up, dial it all the way down. Now you can see the weight, the effectiveness of that thing. Now it's very small. The red line is very tight right against that point. If I dial it way up, see how much that grows, and it pulls so much more of the form with that whole thing. So these are all things you can change. I highly recommend playing with them. At the moment, I'm going to leave the weight at 0. And because of what I'm doing, I'm going to leave it as a smooth transition. So I Control Z out of all of this. Now you can see a little more clearly the range that's affecting, the extent, the range, or the distance. Sorry, I'll try to keep the vocabulary the same. The transition is smooth, and the weight is spread out kind of evenly in that general area. All right. So let's work from either the top or the bottom. Doesn't really matter in this case. I'm going to leave those settings there. I'm going to select all of those. You can see how much that spreads out. I'm going to use the directional slide or the directional slider. If it helps, I'm going to switch to just directional translation. Sorry, just pulling it in one direction. Just going to go that way. Now, you might find that you might want to reduce the amount of vertices you selected. I just dropped that one. Now I'm only selecting these 3. Keep dragging, pulling all the way out. Okay, that's working. Now from here, I want to make sure these sides bulge out too. Or sorry, these sides move out. I'm going to leave it still as a linear, smooth translation rather. Nope, I want to have a from the left. There we are. And instead of using just in and out, I'm going to use the pan, which is the square in between. It allows me to move in 2 orthogonal directions at once, or rather around. So I'm just dragging them out, kind of sort of trying to get things to look right-ish. That's all. Very much with this project, with this especially, you're trying to get it close enough. All right, that actually doesn't look awful. Now, looks like down here, this might end up being a problem. We will address that as it comes up. And what I mean by this is when I look very close, look at how these vertices have all kind of smushed together. I can see that's going to be a problem. But for now, let's ignore it because that's a problem for future me. All right, or back out. Great, the upper bowl shape works. That is a heck of a spoon. So let's now kind of squish this down into a slightly less soup serving spoon. Unless you want to keep with that, that's fine. So from here, I want to do the same, but I'm going to grab levels and squish everything together. Again, I'm just sticking with vertice selection. You can use whatever you like. In this case, vertice works nicely because you have a little bit more fine control. So from the left selection, grab all the things. I'm going to drag. Oops. Forgot. Problem with that is I selected all this. Look at my extent range. The red goes all the way to the top. This would be where you actually do want to dial down the extent range. Let's say 10, maybe even less. 5. There we are. You could, of course, also turn that off. But there we go. Now I have a little bit more control. I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to select now the next series down and all. And again. Uh-oh. Did I freeze it again? There we go. And squish a little bit more. Now, one quick thing. Look what's happening. I'm actually inverting the spoon. Definitely not good. So let's Control Z out of that. Looks like we might be kind of maxed out at the weight there. So let's try to select a few more. There we go. I think I had accidentally not selected that row of vertices. Okay. That doesn't look awful. Doesn't look great, but we're kind of close there. So from here, I can of course say like, oh, you know what? This is kind of a little too even. Let's shift some things around. Let's select all the things. And I'm going to turn off soft modification at this point because I just want to pull everything backward just a little bit here so that it's heavier on the back, more shallow in the front. That's all. Just dragging some things around. That's why I say very much with this, play around. That looks about right is a pretty good way of working. All right. So one thing I want to address right now, I'll say, okay, that's where we're going to go. I can already tell, like I said, there are definitely some wonky things happening down here. So let's figure out how to fix things like that. When I go to finish form, it's probably going to give me an error. Yep. Spline model failed to convert. You want to continue, you can, but you really need to fix this. And you look down at the error box, it's telling you exactly what's wrong. Edges or faces may be crossing. What that means is vertices that were supposed to stay on one side or the other got switched around. Or rather, they didn't get switched, they got drugged past one another. Not sure how, doesn't matter. All right, hit return. Now it's going to keep giving me this error. Good, I can see what's wrong. This would be two ways of fixing this. You have the auto fix, but I want to be able to see this a little more clearly. This is where the utility of the display mode comes in really handy. Let's switch to box display. Makes it a little bit easier to see really where the problem is. And it might even help if I switch to auto color. So I'm going to press Shift November. Just auto coloring kind of helps me see a little bit. Honestly, I'm still kind of confused exactly where what goes where. So let's use the other method. See if it can fix itself. So we go to Utilities, Repair Body. Select the body, and the next the next selection down is Auto Repair. Hit it. It's going to show you there's definitely some problems here. Hit OK. See if it does anything. It did a whole bunch of nothing. Well, poop. All right. Well, we tried the two things. It's over. Start over. I'm just kidding. So those didn't work. Those are your two main solutions. Now we got to try to fix this. Now you got the two other options. We can either try to untangle this mess, or delete the faces and fill the space. So let's try to untangle it first. I'm going to go back to edit form. I can see the vertices already. So these somehow got tangled. So I can select one. Let's try just dragging that. All right. So because it's all mirrored, that kind of did some weird stuff. I'm still not really seeing I'm still not being able to see it clearly. Let's Control Z. All right. I don't know. I'm honestly not too sure where the problem is. I can drag this around and it doesn't seem to be wanting to untangle. So delete that section, start over. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I still don't think it's fixed. I can even check finish form. No, still a problem. Same problem. Utilities, we can try it one more time just for grins, see if it helps. Repair body. There we are. Yep. Yeah, it's not fixing it at all. Okay, that's fine. All right. So then what we can do, you might be able to see a little more clearly now. When I highlight over a face here, you can see obviously that is big time crossing that center line. So I might actually be able to untangle that. So edit form, grab one of those vertices, drag it back across, but see, because it's mirrored, it keeps doing everything. And I think these need to be welded, but I don't want to get into that just yet. So instead, heck with it. Let's select around. So I'm holding down Shift as I select, and because it's on mirrored, I'll select all of these, delete it. I smoothed it out. Also smoothed out the entire bowl. So, hey, that kind of works. So don't be afraid to delete faces. Now, because this is on symmetry, it's going to obviously do it the same on both sides. And we are trying to make something circular. Anytime you have in the form workspace, a rectangular because it's obviously not going to be, it's not going to be like overly angular, but a somewhat rectangular form. If you delete all the faces within, it defaults back to a somewhat circular shape. Cool. So we'll go to modify now and fill hole. And that's exactly what it does. You select the edge. Now, in this case, we can select just the one. That's going to be a problem. I need to double click that. Let's deselect that and let's double click there. Why is it only letting me do that? Stop. Now it's only selecting, letting me select a couple things. So let's use a selection box here. For whatever reason, it's not letting me grab the important ones. Okay, not sure what's happening there, but it did compress, but you've got a few options, and this is where it kind of gets a little funky at first. Don't get too worried. I was just concerned that it wasn't selecting the entire thing. It wasn't giving me it wasn't letting me get there before it jumped ahead. So you have a couple of different options here. What I mean by this fill hole mode. Drop down, reduce star. Honestly, I've rarely used this. I don't feel it seems to not do quite what I want as often. So instead, we're going to go to either fill star, which adds some different faces and some different way. It just, instead of drawing more direct edges, it kind of creates more of a softer loop. Or the other option is collapse, and it brings everything back to a point. Basically, exactly where this was to begin with, in that this was originally created as a sphere. We chopped off the top. It left the, better words, the southern pole and radiated lines outward from there. Now, one quick thing here, make sure you select the checkbox weld vertices. What this does is it makes sure that they actually join. Otherwise, it can create errors as well. Check that box. The last selection here is keep creases, and I'll show you what that means. Right now, it's kind of flat, meaning it's still rounded, which is what we wanted. If you select keep creases, it's going to make it exactly flat off of that space, which, well, if you want a spoon that has a nice little rest, that's not a bad idea. But in a future project, if you are trying to make something rounded and actually want to have a flat bottom for it so it sits stable, that's one way you could do it. So you can use that. I'm going to uncheck keep creases. I want to still have a bit of a rounded bottom. So there we go. Select OK. You can always double check with finished form. It finished form, and frankly, it went right back to a star anyway. So whatever. Okay, cool. So let's save there. Spoon. Oops. Spoon bowl. All right. Now I went to finish form. You cannot do the next operations with separate forms that are finished and then join them together. You can combine using like a combine tool and such, but that's just literally as they are. So I need to go back into that form workspace. So right click, edit space or edit tool. We're back into the same form workspace. So again, it's not recording any history. You have to work within the same. All right. Next, I want to make the handle. Now, technically, yes, I could actually grab one of these vertices, go to edit form, and start dragging this out and tweak this all over. But I don't want to do that right now. So instead, we're going to use a second form. In this case, I want to use a plane, and then I'll manipulate that in a similar fashion and bridge them together. So plane works very much like the center rectangle creation tool in Sketches. So select there again. Of course, you have other options. 2-point. In this case, I do want to use the center rectangle. So it works as the rectangle tool. Same plane right there. Select a point. Excuse me. It's very important, at least for this project, the way we're working, keep it on the y-axis. You can move it, but why not? Leave it on the y-axis. It might be hard to see with your canvas active. So you want to be on that green axis somewhere. Okay. So let me reactivate that so I can kind of make this work. All right. So you don't have to make it the entire length. You do not have to make it the entire width. Kind of sort of close, because we're going to manipulate the heck out of this. That looks okay-ish. I probably should have moved my center point a little bit closer to the center or the center of the spoon handle. That's all right. Don't hit enter, left click on your mouse. If you hit enter, it will automatically finish with the preset settings there. So a couple things. I still want symmetry. So first things first. So first I'm gonna skip to the last. I don't know why they jumble these. So mirror, yep, I'm gonna mirror across that line. So just make sure you have the correct symmetry active. So just double check, and if you need to see a little more clearly, zoom in. Doesn't help that I have the auto color on and it's green. The line is green. The axis line is green. A little bit too much green. So if you need to change that around, just so you can see what you're doing, I can turn off the auto color. Again, shift in. Now I can see a little more clearly because it went back to appearance mode. So that works. Okay. I do want to add some faces. I want to add it along the length. Don't need a lot, just a couple to start with. I can always divvy this up later. All right, so that's 4 across, and of course it's saying across length and width because we've got them kind of flipped. I don't need more, just 2, because I basically just have the left and the right side. That's all you need. I have symmetry active. We're good. That's all I need. Okay. Now, same deal. Edit form. And for this part, I'm going to first start with with edges. So select there. First thing I want to do, let's drag that edge closer to the other one. So pull that close. Don't overlap them. Intentionally leave a gap. All right, good. Same, I can drag the backside, go up, close enough. Okay, cool. Now I can select my vertice again. In this case, I'm going to leave the soft modification off. I don't need that right now. So this is where you can just start manipulating these. Drag them around, get that kind of a little bit closer, bring them in. Bring them closer to your line. Nice. Don't really need to orbit around, but you can, of course, just so you can see what you're doing a little more clearly. And this is just moving. And this is, like I said, a lot of this is simply pushing things kind of sort of into position. Now back here, it's kind of getting a little wonky. The other thing is, I'm trying to recreate this rounded point. The more I play with this, it's still going to leave a sharp point. You can delete vertices. So I'm going to hit OK. Select that vertex, hit delete. Now it automatically will round over things because it's trying to keep things. Essentially, what it's trying to do is there's no point to differentiate an angle between 2 edges. So if you lose a sharp point, it tries to smooth it out. Now I can go back to edit form and I can play around a bit more. Now the thing is if I work by edges, well, I can still do that. It kind of works as one. This is where you get to start playing with. I would switch to your translation or your transform mode to all, because now I can do things like rotate that. I can scale this, pan, and scale it in one direction. So this is where you can really start manipulating stuff when you start really figuring out how and where you can play with these things. So yeah, play around. I'm gonna switch back to select by all so I can just kind of free form here. Drag things close to where. And remember that if you're working off of a canvas, it might be that your canvas is not exactly centered. So if I look at this, it's going to keep throwing me because one side is larger than the other because it's ever so slightly to one side. So there you go. So you can play around with this. Again, you can use any of these. Before I was using the just the directional translation. You don't need to keep it one direction or the other. You can pan, you can drag it up and down. That doesn't matter. It's going to be up to you. You're not really messing with it. You're not messing up anything by playing around with any of that stuff. But there we go. That's pretty close. That's not bad at all. That's pretty close. Now I will go back and manipulate this later, but let's double check again. Finish form. No errors. Nice. All right. So let's save there. Handle done. We go back into edit form. All right. Oops. Next step is I want to join these together. So I'm going to use what's called the bridge tool. Go under modify, drop down, bridge. Pretty self-explanatory. Create segments across two opposing faces within a body or between bodies. So in other words, it creates a bridge between two sides. Novel. So select there. This works by selecting faces. Doesn't matter which side you select, but don't forget that you have symmetry active. So if you select one, activate the other, this is going to cause issues, but let's just have a preview. Looks pretty good. You don't have to select both sides. There's no harm in doing it either, though, unless you don't select one side and the other. So I get the same result by selecting both sides as I do by selecting one side because I have mirror on. That's fine. Okay. Twists you don't need, at least right now. Again, faces. Keep it simple. Let's dial it back. Instead of 3, let's have 1. That keeps it pretty simple. I can add 2, maybe to add a little bit. Now, one thing I am noticing, there's this weird line here. Why is that there? Because I'm on a different mode. I never switched it back from a different display mode. That's all. If I turn that back on or back to smooth, it'll go away. That's what that is. So you can check this box. Says preview, makes sense. It actually shows you kind of what's going to happen. Now, again, because this is on the box display mode, it's going to be a little boxy. That's okay. The flip sides I don't need to deal with right now. Again, keep creases as if I wanted to have it sharp. I don't need that. So select OK. And it kind of does a combination of a loft command in that it creates a smooth transition, but it also brings some faces together. It does move things around a little bit for you. And there you go. Actually, it looks like it, because one was on, one was off, it looks like it defaulted back to smooth. So actually, there we go. Nope, it was still kind of boxy. It was hard to see. Okay. So that's roughly what we're going for. Again, you can double check again. Finish form, no problems. Didn't get any errors. Nice. All right. So let's save there. Bridge done. Okay. And now I'm going to turn off the canvas. So now we have a spoon-like shape. It is only a surface thickness thick. There's no definition to this. Also, that's a hell of a flat spoon. I want to kind of tweak that a little bit. So again, go back, edit. This stuff, as you start working, this will become single flow. You won't have to keep going back and forth. I am simply checking for errors to help you see what may or may not happen. All right. So from the side, I'm going to go to edit form. I'm going to use vertices again. And I just want to move some of these up and down so we have a slightly less flat spoon. So I can drag this up here, a little bit more, there, tiny bit. Maybe at the end, we'll drag that. Oops. We'll drag that down a little bit. Or you can drag all the things up. Does not matter. Just wanted to play around with this a little bit. Other thing is I can always add a little bit of smoothness to that edge right there, but we'll leave it where it is for now. Okay. Save again. Just adding dimension. Okay, last step is let's actually add some thickness to this surface and use the thicken tool. Pretty self-explanatory. It literally creates thickness. It creates this as an offset. So it's an offset line, only it's in a body, so in 3-dimensional space, it offsets in all directions from 1, meaning it doesn't do it unilaterally unless you choose to. So select that. Select thickness. The body is a whole and single body, so select there. Now you have a couple options. Obviously, the first is how thick. 2 or 3 millimeters is probably plenty. Let's go with 3. Bloop. Now it's giving me a preview. It's not going to look exactly like that. And again, I can also play with utilities. Now you have a couple of options here. You have sharp which is going to basically be a kind of like an extrude in one direction. So your edges will, of course, be sharp. That's going to make a stabby spoon. If you select soft, it's going to, instead of the thicken operation go straight up, it's going to kind of add a little bit of a curvature, basically like all the form workspaces by default, kind of a little squishy curvy. It's going to work nicely that way. You have a direction, normal or across the axis. Normal is usually what you need to deal with. You do have a third option, no edge. That basically what's going to do is going to create, you've got your standard surface and then the one it creates, and there's going to be nothing in between. Why would you do that? In case you want to actually then weld surfaces together or add different things. It's a different way of working. But for now, leave it as soft, hit OK, there we go. So yeah, it's a pretty chunky spoon still. And I do have a halo here. Now, one thing I want to point out to you, like, what's going on? I can still see like what I had before. What that's doing is the way that form workspace works is because there is no timeline, it shows you a ghost of your previous move. So before you did anything before, or before you made any large changes, it just kind of shows you so you have some sort of visual representation of where you were and where you are now. This outline, this ghost of when the model was still flat, does not matter. Doesn't change anything. Now, the problem here is if I decide, oh, that's a little too thick, I can hit finish form, but if I came back and like saved this and closed down the program, I would lose that information. I wouldn't be able to step back. So if you want to adjust the thickness, do it now. So I'll hit Control Z and it drops that. Go back, redo the operation. And let's say instead, I want this to be 2 millimeters thick. Hit OK. All right, slightly less chunky spoon. Still have that artifact of the original. There you go. So if I hit finish form, that went away. Now I have this kind of beefy spoon. But if I close down, I won't be able to access that thicken operation again. That is the downside to operating like this. And you can't say finish and then like do a new operation. It's all done inside the form workspace. When you hit finish, now you're outside of it. But much like working with the sketch space, if you make like, you're working on tangents, constraints, stuff like that, you can cut stuff apart, you can redraw it. But if you finish out and close out, you no longer are able to control or command Y and Z back and forth through things. You lose that cataloged or that cached information. So just know that if you are making big changes, you should either save where you are, so at least you create a version to work from. So again, this is where those versions come in really handy with the form workspace, especially, or doing stuff like this. So at least you have some way of getting to before you got to made changes, or make sure you are done before you save and close out the program. So that's pretty much it. Now, of course, you can always make changes to this. Things like I can, of course, go back and say, what if I want to add like some wings or something like that? I don't know why wings. More of like, all right, let's grab some of the faces and that face. Sorry, that's producers. Press and hold Alt, drag. Oops, wrong one. Sometimes it's very difficult to grab it. Do what you're doing there. Control Z that. Press and hold Alt, and it will extrude outward. Did some weird stuff there. Don't know why I did that. Rotate around, just playing around with this. Now it is a shark spoon. I don't know, whatever. You can move some of these faces around. Say back here. I'm going to select both of those, and I'm going to add some serious thickness to the back of this spoon. And now it is also a cudgel. I don't know. You can always go back and play around with this, is what I'm saying. Yeah, that's a funky spoon. All right. Hit save. Modified spoon. All right. Last thing I want to show you with this is how to make alterations, as in to make iterations rather. So, all right. Oops, thought I hit finish form. All right, save again. Finish form. Got it. Okay. Switch to auto color just so I can it helps me see what I'm doing. All right, let's make multiples. Select there. Oops. That is also selecting the canvas. I just want the body. Let's say spoon 1. All right. Control C, Control V, copy paste, or you could just use the move tool and select the create copy, but we know what I'm doing here. Whoop, drag one around, hit OK. Now I got 2. Definitely make sure you eventually move these on a new components. So let's say new components. I'll go ahead and I'll just say spoon 2. Yep, off of that. There we go. Select the thing. There we are. And drag one of those spoons onto that component. There we go. Super duper. Of course, it made spoon 1 nested 1. Okay. And this would be where you could do things like cut holes and things. So I'm going to create a sketch. Select there. And let's just hide the first one so I don't make myself go crazy here. Make a circle. Let's say right smack in the middle. It will still try to select the center. Good. I don't know. 3 millimeters? Sure. I'm going to use that tool there to then, I don't know, let's make an array. Let's use the rectangle pattern and drag that up and out. Great. Select OK. Circle pattern. Select that one to that one. Center point is there. And let's make some more stuff. Yeah, keep going. More. Oop, too many. Close enough-ish. Okay. Finish the sketch, and now I could use that to extrude all of those down through. There you go. So now, not very effective strainer. There you go. You can also do something similar with creating like a spork or a 4 tines. Obviously, you could do this in the workspace as well, but let's switch back to the main component and activate the first spoon. And let's say, oops, I did that. Do another sketch right there. And I'll use, say, like center rectangle right on the front here. Sure, whatever. Let's round that over real quick. Good enough. And I will again use the rectangle pattern for that. And let's make that direction. I want that symmetrical. And let's say, I don't know, 5. Sure. All right. And same deal. Extrude. Select all of those. Emma. What's going on here? Why didn't it do that? Select all of those. Why is it not selecting my profiles? What's going on here? Did I open that up? Ah, dang it, I did. Well, I went too fast. Go back, edit sketch. Looks like what I did is when I made that modification, I accidentally made a weird overlap. Crud. Yeah, well, that's what happens when you go too fast, try to go too fast. Delete all the things. See, yeah, troubleshooting. Go back and fix stuff. All I did is I don't know how I managed to do that, but let's go ahead and just fix that. redraw. Let's trim that chunk. Wow, I really don't know what happened there. I think I grabbed something that I just didn't mean to. That looks, for some reason, I put 0.39. Okay, great. And let's make sure to trim that little chunk away. That looks weird. There is something happening. I can see you. There's a little overlap. Make sure to grab that, trim that away. Otherwise, that will definitely cause problems. Great. Again, let's try this again, and with no major crap ups. There we go. Drag that out. I want that symmetric, and let's say 5 again. There we go. Bling, bling, boom. Okay. Finish sketch. And again, extrude. Now I can select those profiles and just chop them right down through that spoon body. Select OK. Now, obviously, oops, it was a little bit too low. All right. Double fix that. Make sure to also go 2 sides or symmetric. We'll go symmetric. There we go. All the way through. Much better. So that is definitely like a kid spoon, and you should totally put like fillets on that to, I don't know, I guess not stab the side of the kid's mouth or yours, whatever, no judgment. I like my utensils how I like them. Try to put a fillet on. There's an error there. Of course there is. So we'll go back and fix that something later. But that would be a way to quickly modify a couple of them. But of course you could also make them just these weird balloon animal shapes, I guess. It's up to you. But the main thing is create the spoons with alterations. You don't have to finish altering with these. You just need to at least have one as your model, and then you can alter a second and then make a third that's different. Like this could have been, instead of making a bowl, you could have then made like the actual fork tines or something like that. But play around. The main thing about this, the form space, is you can get into trouble with, like I showed you, with getting some vertices crossed, stuff like that. You can get some weird stuff happen, but you can fix it by, if nothing else, use some of the tools, some of the utilities. You can use some of the utilities to fix it, or if that fails, delete the entire faces and use fill hole, and it usually will fix most of your problems. So hopefully that works. Hopefully that helps. And yeah, play around with it. Make something silly. There's no reason to make it direct, or go ahead and challenge yourself. Up to you.